35 years ago, I sat exactly where you are. It wasn't in Rayleigh Chapel, but it was in my chapel on my Christian campus in Texas. And I can assure you, Dr. DeWitte and I had no conversation before I decided this is what I was going to share today. Chapel was twice a week back then, every week, and it was required throughout graduation. That means that I attended a lot of chapels. We actually had assigned seats because that's how they took attendance back in the day. There wasn't any swiping at the door. I didn't mind going to chapel, and I actually don't remember complaining much about it, even though I sat between two people all those years who did. After I graduated, I went on to graduate school where I attended more chapels. We weren't required to go there, but I actually enjoyed them, and I went. And now today, I want to make a confession in your chapel right here, and that is this. In all those chapels, I confess, and not proudly, that I only remember 3 statements from 3 chapels. Out of hundreds, I remember 3 comments. And sadly, I couldn't tell you who was a speaker of any of those, not even the 3 that I remember something from. This is just, I'm not proud of this, it's just an honest admission of what the brain does with information when you don't engage it and when you don't act upon it. So, Ben and I aren't really idealistic enough to think that 35 years from now, you're going to remember us or really anything that we had to say today. However, we have entered this day with one very specific prayer, and that is this. Our prayer is that one statement, one comment, one challenge, one something from what we share today will impact you in such a way that will cause you to begin to engage toward action.
Back in 2017, we worked here at OBU in the Spiritual Life office with Dr. Turner and her wonderful staff. Since then and currently, we've been working in an extremely needy space among forcibly displaced peoples around the globe. Now, the term forcibly displaced may not be one that you hear every day, but you're probably familiar with the term refugee. Basically, we focus specifically on men, women, and children who will not be going home tonight. Those whose lives and families have been torn apart by war or by oppression due to religion, nationality, race, or political identity.
We could discuss in great detail what has probably become the world's greatest humanitarian crisis of our generation, but certainly of your generation. In fact, if we were to have that kind of discussion in here today, it would probably lead to a huge debate, a lively debate of a lot of opinions and thoughts. But in the 30 minutes that we have here today, we really don't have time for that kind of interaction. So instead, Ben and I are just going to address 2 questions. 2. The first one is, why? Why is this happening? How on earth did we get to the place where this many millions of people have become forcibly displaced around the globe? And the second question is, what does this have to do with you, and what does it have to do with me? So the first question, let's dive in. Why? Why is this happening? How did so many people get forcibly displaced? Without choice, they're having to leave their homes just to survive. The truth is, there isn't just one cause. There's not one reason, and we couldn't give you one answer today. It's so multifaceted, so many moving parts. There's wars, there's economic collapse, there's just human sin, the fact that we have a fallen nature. There's also persecution, there's pride, and there's a prejudice. And all of these, and a combination of these, are the reasons that this is happening.
We've made a few discoveries in our work, and we've come to some real heartfelt conclusions. The biggest of these is that God is literally shaking the nations such that men and women and children who have not been in an area where they could openly hear the gospel are now in areas where they can come across a Bible-believing Christian who can share their faith with them. They're in a place where they can listen to a gospel podcast, or they're even in a place where they could step in the doors of a Bible-believing church. Acts 17:26 says, He has made every nationality to live over the whole earth and has determined their appointed times and the boundaries where they live. It's definitely a mystery to me, but I think Scripture clearly tells us that the boundaries and borders of where people live today are drawn by God, not by political entities and not by governments. The governments around the world are in the hands of a sovereign God who is himself today at work, drawing people out from behind countries where they cannot clearly hear his name into areas where they can decide to follow Christ freely.
My friend Bara and her family are actually a perfect example of God shaking the nations and redrawing people's boundaries. Her and her family fled from their Muslim country. They were very well-to-do. They were extremely affluent. They had a very, very good life. In fact, they had enough money to pay the human traffickers a great deal of money to get them to a European nation. This money was enough that they paid for basically a first-class passage to freedom. But what they did not know at the time, that there was no such type of passage that existed. And this is what their money got them. The night they met to leave their country, they were crowded into a huge van that was only designed for a small van that was only designed for a few people, crowded with way more people than that van could hold. And then they drove, she said, for hours. They didn't know where. This wasn't what they paid for. When they got to the place that the van stopped, they all got out, relieved, thinking that they were at least somewhere that they needed to be. And they were told, walk 2 days in that direction. 2 days. They didn't even bring food and water. She said, certainly we would have brought food and water had we known that we were going to be walking for 2 days. We had our baby with us, and she also went without food and water for 2 days. When they finished that walk, they came to a large body of water where the human traffickers met them again. And uncovered with their feet under the sand and the leaves and the soil, rafts, where that large number of people got into one raft designed for only a few. And that night they set sail across an unknown sea in the middle of the night. She said that the weight of the raft was so heavy that eventually they started to take in water. And her and the other mothers, to keep their babies safe, held them above their heads for hours to keep them out of the frigid water and to keep them from drowning. My friends and those people in that raft did make it that night. They made it to the other side. But the months to follow were really no much easier. And in fact, it took them years before they finally received refugee status in a European nation. They were assigned, they didn't choose. They were assigned a very, very small town in a country that had a proud atheist heritage. And without one single word of the language, these new strangers in town had to make a new home, a new normal. But in this very small town, where they were the strangers, where they couldn't speak, and where they definitely did not fit in, there resided a Christian pastor who had lived through the Nazi and the Soviet-dominated years of his own country. And there, in that small town, their lives intersected and changed all them forever. It was a very unlikely friendship, a Muslim family and a Christian Nazi war survivor. Every day, this pastor would come to their house, even though he could not speak one word to them. And he would discover their needs through drawings and pictures that they would draw or point to. They would share with him what they needed, and then he would return the next morning trying to meet those needs to the very best of his ability. It was simple things, formula for the baby, or maybe clothes for the growing baby. Or as the seasons changed, he would bring them clothes because they had brought with them nothing. Sometimes it was more practical things, or a little bit better things, like maybe things just to get settled, like an iron, just those things that make life normal for all of us. And it wasn't these things that he brought them that kept them engaging this pastor, although those things certainly helped them. But instead, it was his smile, his kindness, his generosity, his tenderness that kept them opening the door to him. And eventually, over months and months and months, they eventually began to ask him some questions. And using the app, Google Translator, on somebody's phone, they ask these questions. Why? Why are you doing this? Why are you so kind? Why are you helping us? And it was those questions that opened the door for the pastor to then share the who behind his why. The who that had carried him through the war-torn years of his country. The who had changed his life for eternity. There's so many wonderful details of this story, and I really wish I could share more of it with you. But since I don't have the time, I'm sure you can guess. My friends came to know Jesus through the relationship with this pastor who chose to show love to 3 strangers in town to whom he couldn't even speak a single word. He chose to show biblical hospitality to people for whom God had redrawn the boundaries of their inheritance and of their life. Barrett and her family are the perfect example of the why. And today, my friends are following Jesus with all of their heart. From behind closed doors of a country where followers of Jesus are persecuted, where you have a very difficult time even hearing a testimony about Jesus, to an atheist country where they met Jesus, who they discovered came to seek and to save a world he so desperately loves.
Sadly, though, many displaced peoples don't make it as far as Sherry's friend Bara did. In fact, UN statistics show staggeringly that less than 1% of all refugees are ever permanently resettled in another country. And those who are spend an average number of years of 18 years in refugee camps before getting started in a new country. You may not know that the majority of refugees remain so for the rest of their lives. Never going home, never moving on, just stopped somewhere along the so-called refugee highway for the rest of their lives. What this means is that there are a lot of sojourners, strangers, and aliens displaced all around the world who need someone to step up and just love them and show them hospitality. Let's camp there for just a second. What does it mean to truly love the stranger, the alien, the foreigner? And before we ask that, is there even a mandate for us to do so? Why should we do it? Well, it just so happens that the Bible speaks a lot about what it looks like to love the foreigner, the alien, and the stranger. A common word that's used in the Bible is philoxenia. You guys can probably hear the root words in there and you may know the meanings, but a word today you can substitute is just simply the word hospitality, or more literally, friend to a stranger, love of a stranger or outsider. In the Jewish and early Christian communities, there existed an organic network that consisted of friends who opened their homes to friends, friends of friends, and friends of friends, to a traveler, a sojourner, a pilgrim who was on a journey. Hotels or inns, they existed, but they were really secondary because they're often a little bit sketchy and sometimes operated brothels on the side. These were not preferred over the hospitality of a real-life home. And there didn't even have to be a previous arrangement for a family to come and show up. Simply showing up bound the host to offer gracious and eager hospitality to the stranger, or to put it more deeply, to love the stranger by hosting graciously and selflessly, the way that you would want to be loved when you were on a journey and tired and ready to stop for the night. In the same way, the Jewish and early Christian communities lived out their faith, demonstrating how they intentionally loved others and put into practice their system of beliefs. You may know Hebrews 13, 1 and 2. It tells us to let brotherly love continue. Do not forget to entertain strangers, for in so doing, some have unknowingly entertained angels. I mean, how cool is that? preparing dinner for a table full of angels?
So why did God so clearly tell his people to love the stranger? I actually think it's very simple. God's people, the nation of Israel, they themselves were the strangers. They were the aliens, the sojourners, outsiders. They were the foreigners through so much of their own history. Leviticus 19:33 through 34 says this: "When a stranger sojourns with you in your land, you shall not do him harm. You shall treat the stranger who sojourns with you as the native among you, and you shall love him as yourself," not as the stranger, as yourself. "For you were strangers in the land of Egypt, and I am the Lord your God." This term that been referred to, philoxenia, is the exact opposite of another term, another Greek term that we actually do use today frequently. And this term is xenophobia. I'm sure you've heard it. Xenophobia means the dislike of or the prejudice against those from another place. The fear of foreigners, the fear of people from different cultures, the fear of strangers. Like Ben was sharing about the early church earlier, I really want to be known as a person. I want to be known as a person of what I am for, to be a person who is known for what I believe in, to be a person who is known for what I practice, more than I am known for what I'm against, or what I oppose, or what I don't want, don't like, don't believe. Like Jewish and early Christian communities who chose to be known for loving the stranger as that organic part of who they were as followers of God, we want to be known as lovers of the Most High God, and we want our actions to demonstrate this love in a positive manner.
We work in a world of polar extremes. On the one side, we work with those for whom loving the stranger comes naturally. But on the other side, you find a world where fear and skepticism just dominate the community. A ministry of extremes, those who practice philoxenia on the one side and xenophobia on the other side. This ministry of extremes is the world that we work in among displaced peoples. It's made up of 70.8 million people to be exact. 70.8 million men, women, and children who have names. They had real lives prior to the enemies and the armies coming into their countries. All of them have become sojourners, strangers, and aliens in a land desperately looking for someone to practice hospitality, for someone to practice philoxenia in their upside-down world of terror, trauma, loss, disappointment, fear, and grief.
Each of those 70 million people are real, and each of them have names. Each of them had homes. They had kitchens where they gathered around tables for meals. They had bedrooms where siblings certainly argued, but parents tucked them in at night. They had homes where they celebrated birthdays and holidays. They just celebrated life. I'm sure that in these homes there was laughter and tears, but I know there were hopes and there were dreams for the future. Probably on those floors, fathers wrestled with the sons, and I know that moms taught their daughters to cook in the kitchens of those homes. In reality, these homes were probably just like yours and just like mine. And so today, we would like to introduce you to three people, three of the world's displaced, three people who were forced to flee, not by choice. Please meet three real displaced people by name.
12-year-old Yasmin remembers very little of her last years in Syria. She remembers not having enough food to eat. She remembers the bombs coming in the city. She remembers being very scared, and she remembers the time that her father left the house like he often did, only this time he did not return. With her father gone and the increasing number of explosions in her city, her entire family of 13 was forced to flee. Today, the family lives in a makeshift refugee settlement across the border of a neighboring country. They live in a small, dark, damp tent. There's no school for the children. There's still not enough food to eat. causing her mom to have to work as hard as she can just to feed the family.
Salah also shares her story. On a moonless night, they were preparing dinner in their kitchen when the lights went out. But suddenly, the sky outside lit up, not with the moon, but with bombs. She also remembers several things. She remembers very loud explosions. She remembers a lot of screaming. She remembers fear. She remembers seeing the dead around her. And most disturbingly, she remembers the smell of blood. They fled that night, and they ended up across a border in another country. They left behind all of their possessions. She left behind her possibility for education in a school, along with her siblings, and they left behind a majority of their family and their friends. She says that her and her siblings don't even have time to think about schooling and getting an education anymore. They don't think about fun. They don't think about going outside to play. She said they have such bigger things to worry about, like how to go to bed not hungry, how to have safe water to drink. They also think about how to stay warm both day and most difficultly at night. They're now living in a camp, and they are safe from bombs, but she says life is really still very difficult, and she desperately misses her country, her friends and family, and her home. And then she asked for forgiveness. She asked for forgiveness for being safe while her friends and her family are still back in Syria and in grave danger. This is called survivor's guilt, and it's very common among the displaced. That is her story, and her name is Salah.
Hess lived in Myanmar, and before he was forced to flee for his life, he was a farmer and he taught English in the evenings. While having breakfast with his family one morning, the soldiers came into his village and began to open fire indiscriminately. 5 of his family members were shot. He found his mother lying on the floor, shot in the back. He found his sister with stab wounds. Another sister was beaten badly when she tried to resist the soldiers who wanted to rape her. She hasn't spoken a word since. Hess escaped. He carried his badly beaten sister. They passed dead bodies, crying children, others who had escaped, and they crossed into Bangladesh, where conditions were terrible, but at least they were survivable. He asked you to put yourself in his shoes. We are human the same way as you are human. We just want to live and breathe like you do.
I know you don't know these people, and I realize that you probably haven't had a chance to look into their hurting eyes. But certainly, all of us in this chapel today have a big enough heart that we can put ourselves in their shoes for at least 1 hour, minimally. So this brings me to the second question. What does this have to do with you? What does this have to do with me? Let's go back for just a second and answer this question by beginning to remember God's heart for the stranger and reflecting on the Christian pastor who loved my friend Bara and her family so well. If God has such a big heart for the stranger and the alien and the foreigner, shouldn't we? And what would it look like for us if we had a heart so big and it looked like his? Let's start right here on OBU campus. Did y'all know that there are 75 international students and from 30 different countries here on your campus right now? I realize they left home voluntarily and they came here to get a good education, but they are in a new culture, a new place, a new home, and they don't know many people. Have you ever been the person who moves overseas and become the foreigner and the stranger? Have you ever been the new person in town where you knew nobody? We've done this 8 times on 4 continents. We were the strangers. We were the foreigners. And trust me, those who showed kindness to us and tried to get to know us really changed the experience for us. Those who pursued a friendship with us made our experience all the more rich and our adjustment all the more smooth. So where to begin? For you, be a friend. That's a great place. Practice hospitality to international students. right here on your OBU campus.
Did you know that according to Lifeway research, 75% of international students have never been invited into an American home? 85% of international students have never had the chance to get to know a genuine believer and have never been invited to church. Did you know that 450 current and former government heads studied right here in the U.S.? What if they had had a chance to build a genuine relationship with a believer who practiced philoxenia, to love the stranger? What if they had that opportunity while they were here in school? How would the world look different today if that had been the case? So like Sherry said, the great way to begin is just by showing hospitality to those who are closest around you, right here on campus. Invite your international student friends home for the holidays. Take them out to coffee. Help them with their homework. Just hang out together. They're just looking for someone to be a friend with, like all of us are.
But your opportunities don't have to stop there. Have you considered practicing Christian hospitality or sharing a cup of cold water in the name of Jesus, sharing your faith beyond the borders of this campus, maybe in your state somewhere? Did you know that Oklahoma has resettled over 4,000 refugees since 2002? And they live primarily in the urban centers of your state. In fact, most of the refugees in Oklahoma are from the same country as Ahes, the young man that Ben talked about. Or maybe you're experiencing that nudge from God to move outside the boundaries of your state, maybe to another urban center in another area of the United States, or maybe even to another continent. Did you know, like Ben shared, that 99% of all refugees are never resettled? So why not consider going to them?
Maybe this nudge means looking at one of the many Go Trip opportunities offered right here in the Spiritual Life office. This past year, 284 OBU students and staff traveled to destinations around the globe for the sake of the gospel. 4 of these teams traveled abroad and worked with specifically some of the most vulnerable strangers on the planet, refugees and displaced peoples. They were face to face with people who were forced to flee their homes because of war, conflict, and oppression. Like Ahes, these dear ones were only asking for someone to come alongside them, to walk in their shoes, walk with them, care for them, love them as they desperately try to establish a new life and a new normal.
So no matter what your political persuasion or your preferred media source, today we want to challenge you to let your understanding and your position on the forcibly displaced come from the heart of God and His love for the stranger and the alien and the foreigner. Let your response be one of love and concern that takes action in the simple form of making a friend with an international student, or going to one of the urban centers, or even going on a Go Trip and talking to Dr. Turner about these opportunities. Let yourself be known for what you believe in, for what you practice, by engaging those for whom God has redrawn the borders of their lives. Become one who is known, who shares the word and shares in word and deed the who behind your why. Ben and I are going to be here for the rest of the week, and we would love to talk with y'all if God is moving your heart toward one of these. Thank you so much for letting us have this opportunity. It is such a privilege. We are honored. Dr. Turner and her staff will be in the GC, and they would love to talk with y'all. One statement, you guys. Let God move you toward action on one statement. So, OBU, journey strong, and you are dismissed.